Hello, I'm Juliet Foster, and I'm delighted to welcome you to X-Bank Talks from Publicis Sapient, the series that shines a light on the next generation of banking. Now, in this series, we're talking to banking leaders about the future of the industry, discussing challenges and finding solutions. And today, we're going to be looking at the data-driven bank. Now, as I'm sure most of you know already, data is the lifeblood of digital transformation. To understand the power of data, we only need to look to the meteoric rise of big tech. So today we're going to be exploring what the future data-driven bank will look like, along with the levels of personalisation that customers will come to expect. There's more too. We're also going to be tackling key issues such as how the potential of AI-driven analytics can be realised and what you need to do to navigate the ethical use of data. Big subjects. I'm not an expert, but I know two people who are. Let's meet them. Now, first up, we have Jason Moores. Jason, it's good to see you. Let me tell you about Jason. He's the Chief Technology Advocate at Starling Bank. Now, Starling Bank, they are absolute pioneers, stars in leveraging data with a whole range of industry-leading innovations, like their recent launch of bill management. It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, you're obviously very busy with all these new initiatives, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes. You keep expecting it to slow down, but it hasn't in the 5 years that I've been there.
But clearly you thrive on the pressure. So save it all. We're going to look at this in a few moments' time. But look, another expert who's also very busy is Zach Scott. Now, Zach leads strategy for financial services at Publicis Sapient. It's very good to see you as well.
It's great to be here.
So, guys, thank you so much for being here. Someone had to draw the short straw on the opening question. And, Jason, you'll be delighted to know that it's you. But, look, tell us what it is that you're doing at Starling Bank that has got everybody talking. What marks you out?
So I think the thing that really marks us out is how we give customers access to their data. So a very simple example, when a customer goes and spends money on their groceries in a supermarket, they'll get a notification pop up on their phone saying, you have spent this much money at this supermarket, right? And that feedback loop that they get, where they get to see that we really know about their finances and are telling them about their finances, revealing that data to them, really makes them very happy. We've got a lot of praise about that, and so much so that it's now become more and more of a standard. And of course, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and we're glad that we're being copied far and wide by other current account providers.
And of course, it helps with basic things like budgeting, so we can see how you've got the connection there with the customers. But look, let's peel back the layers on this. How exactly is it that data enables you to deliver more to your customers so that you have a meaningful relationship with them?
That relates to the behind the scenes, what is going on with the data, which is...
So it's the engineering architecture.
Indeed, absolutely. It's the unified architecture that we've created that allows easy transfer of data from one system to another, either within Starling itself or outside where the customer has requested it. That is really what drives the ability to innovate, the ability to give customers easy access to their data and give them that unified view. And it's really having that good, solid foundation of data to build on that enables us to give all of this customer value.
OK, so Zach, it's using that data constructively, something that we're going to touch on a little bit later on in our conversation. But from your perspective, what do you see as the key takeaways for banks in terms of the potential for data and how it can transform the customer experience? Because this is the name of the game. It's making sure that you get it right so that your loyal customers stay with you and you can bring in more.
Yeah, so I think, Starling and the other challengers are actually showing what is possible. And I think we're only still just scratching the surface in that regard, because I think the basic functionality that you're mentioning of you're giving customers insights is really powerful just in its own right, but actually it's the kind of snowball that's going to keep building, I think, into helping customers more with the types of services that they need help with from a financial service standpoint. So what is the best way they can be spending their money? What are the best product offerings they could have? How can the bank be a true partner for them when it comes to their finances rather than just a product provider? And I think the incumbent banks are actually need to learn from that and figure out how they're going to catch up, because it's one thing where it is right now, but give it another 5 years, and if the incumbents haven't started to make that transition, they're going to find themselves very far behind.
Okay, Zach, I can understand the excitement about this because it's working on the fundamentals, but from a customer perspective, what can they expect this to look like? What expectation needs to be fulfilled, and how do you see those expectations being tangibly transformed?
Well, I think we're still just at the foundational phases, I would say. I mean, we've seen this incredible growth in the amount of data that's available. And actually the challenge right now, right in the immediate term for a lot of banks, is just simply handling the quantity of data that they have and making sure it's secured and protected as well. But I think that we're on the cusp of the next couple phases of transformation, which is where I think customers will really start to notice a difference. The first being what we've already mentioned about Starling, of giving a bit better insight into how they're using their finances. But actually, that's for me only a stepping stone to actually helping them and nudging them in the right directions to optimize their financial lives. So whether it be optimizing their bill payments or which types of financial products they have, I think there's a lot of innovation that's going to be coming through the market in the next 5 years around looking at customers not as just pumping banking products into them, but what is the collection of services that we can offer them personalized to their needs that are going to really make a big difference in their lives.
Yeah, so helping them to make informed choices. I like the way that you use that word nudge, a gentle push.
Well, because there's one thing, one thing that I notice a lot of organizations fall down on is they get so focused on that struggle of just getting the data in one place, then they focus on, okay, well then we have some insights, we have some interesting metrics that we can look at. But they forget that actually all that really matters in the end is what actions you're going to take, whether that's you're going to be doing something to your customers and trying to see how they react and giving them something, or also actually a lot of the innovation in financial services is actually for colleagues and for the back office and teams. So for example, how do we make sure that the way we're operating is more operationally efficient by greater automation, and how do we make sure we're making the right choices from a risk perspective so that we're not putting our capital at risk in a way that will hurt our customers and our bank.
I mean, let's stay with this, because what I'd really like to know as well is how the banks themselves can make sure that they are making these changes. It's all very well and good to talk about it, but it's the actions that count. And what is it they need to do with their data now to be prepared for this future?
So I think a lot of them are, there's not a single bank out there which is not at least starting to do this. And part of that's been because of tremendous pressure from a regulatory standpoint as well, where the regulators are also expecting, for example, that you have a clear view of your current capital positions so that you're safe from that perspective. But I think what hasn't happened yet, which needs to happen, is a cultural shift of the realization of actually we need to upend in a lot of ways how we're currently operating, and data and analytics can't just sit over here in a kind of silo, and you have like people on the kind of business side or the operational side who've been doing it for 30 years and kind of know how it should be done. Actually, the transformation is going to be realizing that the way it's been done for 30 years is actually not as how it should be done in the future, and that data is going to start to reveal those parts of I don't know what it's called, organizational wisdom that needs to be upended.
And let's move along now. So I want to focus on leveraging data. We've talked about it a great deal, the concept, but in a bit more detail, Jason, the fact is that organisations, regardless of whether they're banks, whatever, they are collecting data, often from the most unlikely sources. I mean, we're either wearing it in our clothes, it might actually be in our bodies, it's in our homes, it's in our cars, whatever. So given that you've got these multiple sources which are generating information about every individual, what are the considerations that have to be made in collecting this data and also tracking behaviours on the various devices?
So you have to really be asking yourself the question right up front, why are we collecting this data? What is it for? And maybe you don't quite know, but you at least have to have a hypothesis. You have to have something that you're testing. Just going out there and saying, let's collect all the data we can and bring it into the organization is not only unethical and looked very dubiously upon by regulators, it also doesn't help. Because it's very possible when you get huge data sets together to find correlations between two things that have absolutely no causal relationship whatsoever. And you can end up completely confusing yourself by just spotting a correlation that doesn't matter in the slightest. So you really have to know why it is you're collecting a piece of data, even if it's just to test a hypothesis. You need to have that clear understanding up front, rather than going out and getting the data first.
Zach, let me pick up on this because, look, there are plenty of hurdles to overcome because of all this data that's coming through. And what's even more freaky, I guess, is that the digital channels and the transactions are increasing. I mean, what are these big hurdles, apart from the fact that you've got all this info coming in and you have to be objective in terms of how you use it?
I think the hurdle that most organizations are currently struggling with is just from a technology side and a scale side, just being able to handle and ingest that quantity of data. And as you mentioned, it's been growing exponentially and only accelerating as even more interactions are driven in digital channels as opposed to in-person channels. But the technology now exists. I don't think that will be a lasting challenge. The next wave will then actually be more about how do you go from all that data to the actual insights that really matter? And then how do you go from those insights into the actual actions that will change how you interact with your customers and also how you manage your bank more effectively? I think that's going to be where a lot of organizations are going to have to invest and going to see a lot of change, because it's going to end up upending the way that they're currently operating and probably challenge a lot of the institutional wisdom that is currently being used to guide the banks.
OK, let's move along now, because a 2020 service by Publicis Sapient found that 61% of global participants know almost absolutely nothing about what companies do with their data. So we've pretty much alluded to that anyway, but let's go through that in a bit more detail. It's a question to both of you, so I'm going to be kind to you, Jason. I'm going to put this over to Zach instead, which is appropriate since it was your company which did the survey. But what it alludes to is transparency, or perhaps lack of transparency. I mean, is that your take, and are we likely to see more measures in place, or indeed regulations, to ensure that we do have this ethical use of customer data, so that we have this transparency, that people feel reassured?
Yeah, and yes is the short answer, and I think you're already seeing that. It's already required in regulations like GDPR, for example, and I think most organizations appreciate that ultimately the customers want to know that the data that is about them is not being used for purposes that they wouldn't approve of. And I think there's going to definitely be a wave of increased transparency there. And technology enables that as well, because there's a greater ability to actually, for example, track where and how data is exposed across a different environment. That'll make it easier. I think, though, the kind of counterbalance for banks as well, though, is that there is a benefit that they can offer to their customers from collecting more of this information, and actually a lot of the benefit as well is not even related to customers. It's related to their own operations, their own risk management practices. So though there's the risk on the one hand of using customer data in the wrong way, I think there's actually a lot of benefit, even aside from the customer, from using their own internal data more effectively.
I would say it's very much data is very much like money for banks, in the sense that they can use it in aggregate to benefit themselves, as they use their customers' deposits in aggregate to lend out and gain benefit from that. But ultimately, just as a customer's money belongs to the customer and has to be given back to the customer if the customer wants it, so their data needs to be given to them as well. If they want their data, it is their data. It does not belong to the bank. And I think that is ultimately what all of these regulations, such as GDPR and PSD2 and so on, all of them are aiming at this idea that a customer owns their data and should be able to take it and move it around where they want. And I think that is the transparency that is needed. I think there's also a degree of transparency needed in things like terms and conditions. We've all gotten to the stage of going, yes, I have read this
Even if we haven't.
massive pages long terms and conditions, even if we haven't. And also, it becomes somewhat unreasonable to expect that people have read that dense legal documentation.
Or understand it, because it is steeped in legalities.
Indeed, indeed. So, this idea that actually you have to be more transparent in your terms and conditions and more obvious as to what is happening is becoming more and more, I would say, embedded in our regulatory culture, and I, definitely welcome that drive.
Okay, Zach, let me throw this one to you because, we've talked a lot about personalised services. That's one of the hot buzzy conversations happening at the moment. But how do you know when to stop? I mean, it involves a crossing of a line, but what is that line? Who has the right to draw it?
I think the customer ultimately is the client, the individuals on the other end are the ones who have to draw that line. And that's why I think it's really important to have a culture of, it's not just about the data, the insight, the testing, but also of testing. So actually, before you release something, some personalized service or other that you think is going to be great, why don't you try a little bit first? Because it can go very badly. So there's a very high profile example in the US. There's a big retailer called Target, which I think they have some in the UK
I think
as
they
well.
do. It's a very small footprint.
It's much bigger in the US. In the retail space, identifying women who are about to be pregnant is the best potential customer you could ever target. And actually, they built an incredible analytic capability that could predict when young women were pregnant even before they knew. And they got in trouble because they were sending promotional pamphlets to their houses, and sometimes it was a teenage mother-to-be, and their parents would find it. And it damaged them pretty terribly. So it's an example of...
That sounds a bit Orwellian, actually.
Yeah, exactly. But it's an example of, there's something there that, yes, it's amazing value, and it probably is helpful for the customers to some extent because you're giving them access to promotions that maybe will help them, but it went too far because you violated, in a way, trust, like what we were talking about before.
This, I think, is really important, to just to emphasize what Zach is saying, that this idea that companies can hyper-personalize their services by knowing their customers better than their customers know themselves is, I think, wrong. I think that when it comes to personalization, again, the customer should be given the options and put in control of what services they consume and how they consume it. But the minute you step in and go, well, I've just walked into a bakery and that I've never walked into before, and they offer me what I wanted, just by accumulating data on me. That's scary. That's creepy.
Clearly, all those bakeries are having a conversation with each other.
Indeed. And the Target example is perfect, right? The example of where you're offering this promotional material because you know that the person's pregnant, but you haven't taken into consideration that other people in their life might not know, and that it might be important for them not to find out by having a letter sent from a retailer.
Particularly if it's a 16-year-old girl living with her parents or something. I mean, it is fascinating, but scary at the same time. I guess it's when things go, as we said, a little bit too far with the innovation which produces this. It's knowing when to stop. But look, a final question to both of you. Jason, I'll give it to you first. But look, if there's one piece of advice that you would give to banks in terms of what they should be doing today, what would it be apart from not finding out about our fertility patterns and what we eat at bakeries?
Sure, absolutely. It would be, you need to do some really boring work first. You're all excited about AIs and machine learning and all of this sort of stuff, but unless you have your underlying databases in a good position, unless they are well connected up, unless you know what data is in them, and that data has been properly cleaned and properly represents what the actual state of the customers is, then it doesn't matter how fancy and expensive your overlaying technologies are. If you put garbage into them, you're going to get garbage out of them. So you need to do that sort of fairly boring housekeeping, underlying fundamental work on the underlying databases first before you get to the exciting stuff.
Zach?
I would say, in addition to everything that he just said, if I were most banks, I would also be investing heavily in trying to create a better kind of test and learn culture and way of working. Because I think at the root of becoming a data-driven organization is becoming more insight-led and rather than held wisdom-led. And that will be a pretty big cultural shift for a lot of organizations and requires a very different way of working. And they need to start investing in that now.
Sound advice from two experts. Thank you so much for that. Sadly, we have run out of time, but it has been a fascinating discussion on how banks can best use data and the practical steps to realising its potential. I'm sure that you will agree there's a lot to think about and, of course, to implement. All that remains is for me to say goodbye and thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the not-too-distant future.